Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another video on ForgottenWeapons.com. I'm Ian McCollum, and I'm here today in Karlovac, Croatia at the HS Product Factory. And today we're taking a look at the VHS-1. I want to throw in a bit of an editorial element here. Rifle design, firearms design is difficult. It takes practice, it takes time, it takes experience. And one of the things that impressed me about the VHS-2 rifles is that while people may not have been very familiar with HS Product as a company, there was a substantial developmental track record that led to the VHS-2. It wasn't a rifle that was created out of thin air in its current form. And so we've been looking at all of the sequence of rifles that would lead up to that point. If you haven't seen those other videos, I would encourage you to go back and look at them, because at every step along the way, you can see the experience of HS Product's engineers and designers improving. The very first gun was a bullpup conversion of a Zastava M70 AK, and it was, shall we say, not very practical. And now we've gotten to the point of the VHS-1 where we have a rifle that is capable of proper, true modern military service, and it is a rifle that was adopted by more than one military force. It was not yet perfected because there were a number of improvements that would come out of this to create the VHS-2, but what we have here is a pretty darn mature rifle. So if we go back a little bit, development of this began in 1997 or 1998, and at that point it was two rifles being developed in parallel. Our previous video in this series looked at the other one, which had a lot of influences from the IMI Tavor. This one remains heavily influenced, especially in the layout and the ergonomics, by the French FAMAS. However, the operating system is a long-stroke gas piston instead of a lever delay, like the FAMAS. So let's take a closer look at how this actually functions, because it is, while not the final iteration of the VHS, it is a pretty darn good rifle on its own. All right, let's start by looking at a few of the markings here. This is a VHS D1. There were two models that were actually produced. The D1 has essentially a 20-inch barrel. It's 500 millimeters. The K1 is the short-barreled version. That's a 16.1-inch barrel, or 410 millimeters. And then caliber 5.56 and serial number. Up here we have the HS Product logo. And then on the right side, again, HS Product made in Croatia. Bullpups were a popular style of military rifle at this point, and another thing that was popular was the integrated optic. So these are being adopted or developed right at that time when optics are starting to become more commonly issued, but they're not detachable optics. You have systems like the G36 and the Steyr AUG that have integrated optics in their carry handles, and HS Product went ahead and did develop that exact same sort of thing. So we have a version of the VHS-1 with iron sights, again, very FAMAS-like on the carry handle there, and there's a version where there is an integrated 1.5 power optic built in. This has a couple of lens covers built into it. We can protect it like that. We have a battery right here. Because there is an on-off button for an illuminated reticle, these are your elevation and windage adjustments. There you go. And there is a set of very simple backup iron sights on top of the integrated optic. Now, the standard version of the rifle has iron sights that are a virtual clone of the FAMAS's. So you've got two flip-down aperture sizes here. You can take them both down and you have a gigantic ghost ring for use at night. See, we have elevation adjustment right there. That's actually, well, it's a little bit simpler probably than the FAMAS system, and it runs from 1 to 400 instead of 1, 3, and 500 meters. The front sight is also very similar to the FAMAS, not quite identical. You've got a little bit more of a shark fin effect going on there with the VHS-1 front sight. And then it's not present on this rifle, but originally you would have a night sight that slid up and down on this dovetail rail, so you could slide it up for use at night. The Vhs Magazine is a proprietary design, although it looks very much like a G36 magazine. Capacity is 30 rounds, totally normal. And you'll notice it has locking studs and notches here so that multiple magazines can be locked together to use, well, to jungle clip, essentially. One of the limitations of the system is that it only has a right side ejection port. So we've got our magazine well back there. The magazine release button is a paddle on the back. Push that in and pull the magazine out. The charging handle is very FAMAS-like. It is completely ambidextrous. So you pull the charging handle out to either side, also much like the G36. And the rifle will lock open on an empty magazine. And then one of the neat elements that I'm actually now kind of surprised I haven't seen elsewhere is the bolt release is located here on the pistol grip, frankly, just like a pistol slide release. So for a right-hander, and that's the only way you're going to be shooting this rifle anyway, the bolt release is right under your thumb. And there it goes. The safety remains FAMAS-like, so the safe position is with the safety rotated right in front of the trigger. That's pretty self-explanatory. And then if you roll it out to the left, that is full auto. And if you rotate it around out the right, you have semi-auto. Again, just like a FAMAS. The difference is the FAMAS had a selector back here to allow you to go between real full auto and limited 3-round burst. And the VHS-1 does not have a burst system, which frankly is no loss to anybody because that's really not all that necessary. We have a gas regulator at the front here. It's 2 positions. It's just on or off. The off is used for rifle grenades. You can see, again, like the FAMAS, you have corrugations there for a grenade launcher, range lug, which isn't on this rifle, and then the muzzle device is set up to support rifle grenades. Disassembly is, well, much the same as the VHS-2 that would come later. We'll start by pulling this pin out. That then allows me to pull this down and out. It's got a little hook here that holds into the top of the receiver. And that has the captive mainspring. With the buttstock off, we can now take out the bolt carrier and operating rod. This is one permanently attached piece, so it looks like a long stroke gas piston system. This is actually just a very long op rod attached to the bolt carrier. We'll get to the actual gas piston in a moment here, but we have a multi-lug AR-18 style bolt. So in some ways you could compare this to something like a Daewoo. Very standard sort of cam arrangement. That's the pin that holds the firing pin in place. So if I push that pin out, pull it out there, then the firing pin is going to come out, then cam pin comes out, and then bolt comes out. So nothing particularly out of the ordinary there. We can also remove the handguard by popping out this front pin, and the handguard just slides off the front of the rifle. Nothing really going on there either. Inside here, you can now see the actual gas piston. So if we push that in, rotate it to the disassembly position, pull this out. So there's your multi-part gas piston. That's the piston itself with an actual a couple of gas sealing rings on it. That's an interesting addition. That sits inside this guy, which is the cylinder side. There is your gas port. So in the functional position, the gas port's pointing down to link up with the barrel. When you rotate it 180 degrees to the off position, there's no hole there. And then that is simply the spring that pushes the piston back into the cylinder after firing. So when you do fire, this piston is going to poke backwards, like so. It's going to hit the front face of the operating rod here. In fact, you can see that ring on the front face of the op rod where it has been doing that, and that's going to push the whole bolt carrier assembly backwards to cycle. The VHS-2 would take this sort of modular pin removal style of disassembly a bit farther, but on the VHS-1 here, the remainder of disassembly can only be done by removing screws. So The handguard assembly comes off with 3 screws. The magazine well assembly is also removable using 2 screws there and there. So I'm going to go ahead and leave those in place because that's not part of the standard field stripping procedure. And there you go. That is the HS product VHS-1 rifle, all field stripped. The final development of the VHS-1 here took place between 2003 and 2005. It was formally announced in public at a military expo in Zagreb in the summer of 2005. The Croatian military did a bunch of testing on it, did a significant endurance test, came away satisfied, adopted the rifle, and the first deliveries were made to them in 2007. In total, about 20,000 of these rifles were manufactured, which is not, you know, a Mauser K98K or a Kalashnikov, but that's nothing to sneer at, especially for a company's first mass-produced rifle. In addition to the Croatian Army, it was adopted by a few other countries. So the first export contract actually, interestingly, went to Kurdistan. They would then also be sold to the rest of the formal Iraqi government. The Iraqi Army used these guns, still has a bunch of these guns. And there are a number of lessons that would be taken from this to integrate into the VHS-2. So in particular, the biggest shortcoming of the VHS-1 is that it is not an ambidextrous rifle. You cannot switch shoulders on it. Effectively, it only has right-hand ejection. And that would, at the time that this was developed, that was seen as an acceptable compromise because there weren't that many countries or that many shooters who needed to shoot left-handed. And if you looked at the other countries in the world that were operating bullpup rifles, basically none of them could be swapped shoulder to shoulder either. Most of them could be adapted. You could set the gun up for a left-hander, but you couldn't hot swap it from one shoulder to the other. The examples here being the FAMAS, the British L85, and the Steyr AUG. All of those, the AUG and the FAMAS, you can switch to left-handed, but once you're switched to left-handed, you can't then just swap the gun back on your right shoulder without a little bit of mechanical work. And so, at any rate, the point I'm getting at is this was seen as an acceptable compromise. However, as the rifles went into production and as the engineers at HS Product continued to look at the gun and try and figure out how they can improve it, they started to come up with ways where they could make it both swappable from left and right ejection, but also hot swappable from shoulder to shoulder, even without changing the ejection system. And so that, combined with a few other ergonomic improvements, which it pains me a bit to say, but largely involves getting rid of the elements from the FAMAS, that is what would lead to the VHS-2. So if you're interested in the VHS-2, which you should be, it's a pretty cool rifle, I already have a couple of videos out there on it. One of them on the French Army trials examples of the VHS, that would be the VHS-2F, and also one on the Springfield Hellion, which is the semi-automatic civilian version that is available in the United States. So I'd like to give a big thanks to HS Product for giving me access to all of their cool prototypes here that I can film and show to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed this one and the rest of the series. Thanks for watching.